Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this really amazing panel, Black Pathways in BioAnth. Before we start the panel, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how this panel came to be and the bigger program that it's a part of. So this week, starting from Monday, it has been Black in BioAnth Week, which is a social media campaign from February 1st to February 7th, which is on Instagram and Twitter, highlighting the work of Black bioanthropologists with different themes for the day. And already had two events on Monday. One was an Instagram live session with Delande and Jordan from the Black in Archaeology team, as well as a kickoff keynote webinar with Dr. Stephanie Poindexter. And today is our third event, the Black Pathways in BioAnth panel. We also have a last event, which will be tomorrow. This is the Future of the Field Friday after hours. And this is a sort of casual get-together networking event, which will take place tomorrow, February 5th at 8 p.m. EST. So please check out our page on Instagram and Twitter. It is Black in BioAnth, you can see on the screen, and register for these events. Okay, so now let me go into today's event. Today we're going to have a casual conversation, a little bit back and forth with each other, as well as with you all through the question tool to talk about the pathways of the different panelists and how they got into bioanthropology and their different journeys. But we will start with a short introduction. Let me start with Myeashea. Myeashea, go ahead, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Myeashea Alexander, and I'm a science communicator and biological anthropologist. I'm also the creator and manager of the Rockstar Anthropologists, which is a science and anthropology blog, as well as the Rockstar Anthro hands-on mobile bone lab, which is an interdisciplinary hands-on learning experience that lets children and communities from wherever learn about forensic anthropology and archaeology by solving a case through kind of narrative form. I completed my master's in 2016 in bioanthropology through CUNY Hunter, and much of my focus during that time was on forensic anthropology, although I could say most of, I would say 70 to 80% of my fieldwork probably having to do more with employing those methods in a historical or archaeological setting. I actually didn't get into bioanthropology until I was starting my master's, and so my previous degrees focused more on culture and media and international relations. I trained as a filmmaker, and I currently work full-time in the social impact and entrepreneur space while I'm researching and doing SciComm and creative professional work on the side. That's me.
Thank you, Myeashea. Next we have Delande.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Especially happy that this this conversation is happening as part of a pretty important week in our discipline. So my name is Delande Justinvil. I'm currently a third-year doctoral student at American University, and I've come to the point of trying to describe my research interests as lying at the intersection of the body, biology, and Blackness. My training is in skeletal biology and in bioarchaeology, and my current focus is how I can apply these research methods to the plight that's currently facing African burial grounds, constantly being uncovered, rediscovered when they shouldn't have been erased from the urban landscape in the first place. So I think that's all I got.
Thank you, Delande. Next, we have Dr. Allison Nesbitt. Allison, can you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, Allison Nesbitt. I'm originally from New Jersey. Now I'm an assistant teaching professor at the University of Missouri in the School of Medicine. So I teach anatomy to medical students, physical therapy students, and then case-based small group learning to first and second year medical students. My training's in forensic anthropology as well as BioAnth and anatomy. And I'm happy to be here as kind of a link between Black and BioAnth as my background, and then Black and anatomy as well as the group I'm part of, and here today as an anatomist.
Thank you, Allison. Next, we have Dr. Danae Reed. Danae.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited for Black and BioAnth Week, which has been just a joy to experience. My name is Denné Reed. I'm an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Texas at Austin. My research focuses mostly on early human evolution, human origins. I work in Ethiopia, but I've also been working for a long time a lot of different places in East Africa, including Kenya and Tanzania, as well as Botswana and some other places. My main focus is on the ways in which environment affect early human adaptation. So I have kind of one foot in paleoecology and one foot in human paleoanthropology. I'm also the founder of PaleoCore, which is a project to organize the exchange and integration of data in biological anthropology. So I work a lot with trying to bring together different researchers to integrate their data so we can have a better understanding of the bigger picture of human evolution. Yeah, and so just really excited to be here and to see everybody. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Danae. Last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Lashonda Williams.
Hi, I'm originally from the DC area. I got my bachelor's degrees in anthropology and sociology from VCU. Decided to pursue human skeletal biology. I got my master's at NYU. But while I was there, I sort of pivoted towards microbes. I ended up doing my master's thesis on the ecology, evolution, and epidemiology of the Middle Eastern respiratory coronavirus. I actually thought for my PhD I would continue to build upon that work, but I couldn't get any funding. And this was back in 2014. I ended up doing my PhD at Rutgers. My dissertation was on the natural history of dental and oral disease, as well as the evolution of the human oral microbiome. I continued to work on, I guess, microbiome bioinformatics during a postdoc for a year at Albert Einstein College of Medicine here in the Bronx. And now I am working as a bioinformatician and data scientist at Merck / EMD Serono. And I'm also happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So before we start getting into questions and answers from the audience, I know you have all introduced yourselves a little bit, but I want all of you to go a little bit more in depth in your journey. What prompted you to go into bioanthropology? If you are a student currently, you know, how did you get into or choose that program? If you're faculty, same question. And then LaShanda, I would really want to hear your journey into industry versus academia. So we'll do the same rotation and have you tell us a little bit more about your story. And everyone in the audience, as the panelists are sharing their stories, please feel free to send through questions. We'll have a long question and answer section right after the longer introduction. So, Myeashea, tell us more about your journey.
Sure. So I was supposed to be a music video director. I come from a family of like serious artists, right? So it wasn't that science was sort of out of the question or anything like that. It was just something that it wasn't part of the sort of training that I was brought up to have per se. My mom just wanted me to be a well-rounded student in everything. So it was my goal to be as good as in science as it was English, math, you get the picture. But I finished high school a little bit early. My mom thought I was too young to graduate, so I took film video courses. And since I ended up graduating high school with 2 years of film production under my belt, when I went to college, the goal wasn't necessarily to look for a career. I was going to make videos and documentaries and go to Hollywood with, the rest of my family. So when I went to college, I sort of threw myself into everything that I possibly could, but it was somewhere around the age of 22 or 23 where I decided to sort of buckle down, and I took an anthropology class, that sort of cultural anthropology class that a lot of people talk as like their gateway into anthropology that they love so much. And for me, I turned it into a career, and I thought I was great at languages, so I would go into international relations and anthropology and work at the UN as a US cultural ambassador or something like that. So I got to study in Paris and Belgium. And eventually I transferred into the new school for my bachelor's degree in culture and media. And again, I was focusing more on documentary making and storytelling at this point. And while I was there, I produced a documentary on hip hop music, which, being from New York, you would think I would know a lot about it, but I really didn't, because I was a rock and roll punk rock chick from Brooklyn. And so having this cultural or this sort of academic approach into studying this element of really transformative Blackness made me want to do more of it. And so during this time while I was at the new school, I also worked full-time for Apple, and I ended up teaching a lot of the Apple softwares and creative softwares, and I discovered that I was really good at teaching people. So I decided I would go to school, I would go into a master's program that happened relatively quickly and easily, that I got accepted into Hunter. And I ended up taking a job just so I would have a more stable schedule than like a retail, even though I was teaching a retail schedule. I ended up taking a job at a very small startup at the time called Etsy. And in my first semester while I was at Hunter, I injured my back. And I couldn't keep up the 2 jobs, grad school, physical therapy, that pace, it was over. So I knew I wanted to continue my master's, but I took a semester off. And during that semester, I was so worried about being outside of the academic space that I got on the internet and I started to look for opportunities where I could volunteer or be helpful. And I ended up getting work as a museum explainer for an exhibition at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia called the Mummies of the World exhibition. And it was by the German Mummy Project. And so every weekend I would take a bus to Philadelphia for my shift, and the museum and the curators trained us about the processes and techniques to put all the exhibition together. And this was the first time that I really had an opportunity to interface in a meaningful way with biological anthropology. And I loved every minute of it. It turned out that I was very good at being a museum explainer. So again, I thought I would work in a museum because that's what you would do with a anthropology degree, still not fully understanding what bioanthropology would mean for me. So I started, when I finally came back to school, I went back to school and was working on skeletal biology. That was like the first class that I took. And during this time period, I'm still coming back and forth to Philly, and I would try and share these stories that I was learning in the museum about the different individuals that were a part of this exhibition. And I would be with my grad classroom, students sharing this stuff. And then there's sort of like this academically competitive thing that would come out. And I wasn't trying to brag or anything. It wasn't a competitive thing. I was genuinely excited about what I was working on. So it sort of sucked the joy out of talking about what I was doing on the weekends when I wasn't at school or at work. So my brother was like, you should start a blog because these stories are, or no, he said, you should start a book because these stories are really great. And I was like, well, I'm not going to write a book. I don't have that kind of discipline, but I can start a blog. And the goal was very simple. I was just going to share sort of the fun and interesting things that I was learning in anthropology and science, but in a real conversational tone, because the people that I wanted to speak to weren't really academics or even grad students. They were the people that I was speaking to in the museum, the enthusiasts, the people that just wanted to learn or were just interested, right? So when I started this skeletal biology and morphology class, I did an independent project studying cranial facial reconstruction. And it was that I was like, I want to do more human skeletal bio, but I could not afford NYU. Like, that was out of the picture because I'm paying for this myself. And so a lot of field schools were also really, really expensive and require you to be away in the field for like 4 and 8 week field programs. And if you're working full time, paying your own bills, those aren't options, like not in any real shape or form, because I don't know too many employers that will let their employees go and still find a way to pay them for 2 months at a time. So again, I got creative and ended up emailing a bunch of different museums in the area. And I was asked by the National Museum of Natural History to come for their Written in Bone exhibition because they were doing a public forensic anthropology lab. So every Friday at 4 a.m. for a year and a half, I paid to get on a megabus or a Bolt bus, head down to DC for my 10 a.m. 5-hour shift, and got a chance to connect with forensic anthropologists for the first time in my life. And also got a chance to actually see what it was like to do the examinations and to learn about this excavation, and still focusing on research and archaeology courses in school and starting to take more bioanthro specific courses. And part of the gig at the Smithsonian was that we set up a lab, and it was during the exhibition at the end at the end of the exhibition. Some of you might have even gone to this exhibition, but at the end of the exhibition, there was a lab open where we would walk people through what it was like to put together a biological profile. They used real case notes, real histories. Everything was as real as you could possibly get, including the bones, although in my own bone lab, I do not use real bones. But anyway, one day as I was walking through the exhibition, I saw a forensic sculpture of a Black woman who was found in Jamestown. And I remember that this was my chance to get to really examine the remains and the case. And she reminded me of my sister. She even looked like my sister. And this was like the first time I really thought about, like, whoa, I've not seen me in any of the anthropology that I've done. I haven't studied any other Black individuals, no Black academics. And I never questioned it before because I had been so used to being the only Black person in the room. So as all of this is sort of happening and unfolding in my head about how my research might become a little bit more focused, my blog actually started to pick up speed and become more popular. And I ended up getting accepted into a science communication program for graduate students at ComSciCom. And it was there that I would meet Robin Nelson, Dr. Robin Nelson, who would change the course of my career. It was the first time that I met a Black woman biological anthropologist. I didn't understand or know that this was, or even realize how rare her presence was. And I didn't know how much I needed to see her. And so it was because of talking to her. One of the things that I had done with my blog, I was so scared of not being taken seriously because the internet is a horrible place. And so if they realized I was Black or a woman, they would start questioning whether or not I was serious or whether my work was real or whatever it was in my head. And she was the one that made me realize it was really important that I came wholly and completely, even if I was doing, whether it was my academic research professionally or through science communication, it was really important that I was showing up in wholeness. And this was my superpower. So this started to really shape the sound of the rockstar anthropologist and the look. It was then when I decided that I wanted to reach a little bit further with how I did my science communication, and I started the skeletal biology lab that I mainly take to schools that are considered failing schools. And they are primarily in the Black and brown neighborhoods where I go. And I used the very similar model to what we did at the Smithsonian, because it was a model that really, really worked very well. And I also thought it was really important that I privilege Black people and spaces in the exploration of how we utilize forensic anthropology and archaeology tools, specifically because that had never happened. And so in New York, this pretty much meant the African American burial grounds. And so that's where the majority of my cases were set, because I wanted students to be able to go to those places as well and connect with those places, and made it really real to them as much as they could possibly understand what they were around. And so from there, I started getting invites to give talks in a lot of different places, science nights, bars, community centers, and I would always take it as an opportunity to privilege Black spaces and places and topics. I will never forget being invited to go to a death positive movement that I somehow got invited to, and they asked me to do a talk on bioarchaeology in the Black body, and I show up to this restaurant style space, and there's only other Black face I see is me and my husband, and my PowerPoint lecture goes up, and the title is "Why Won't White Folks Let Us Rest in Peace?" And I was like, oh crap, but I was already in it, so I did it. And and what was really happening was I was building these connections that to me seemed so much more powerful and personal and resonant by using the narrative to really help explain the science, the reasoning, and the importance of being active and engaged, not only with the spaces, right, but also with the work. I remember that so much of what Michael Blakey did was working with the community, was about getting the community to advocate for the Black spaces and the burial grounds that were there. That could have happened with just him and his team. It required that community support. So when I go to the community centers, I always pull records of what was there. I try and see what those spaces look like, what kind of things might be happening in the area, so that it becomes an important part of connecting the academic, the history, and the experience, of course. But through all this, I'm still working on my master's, and as I get closer to my PhD, I found that I wasn't getting the warm reception that I thought I would get in academia. Maybe my, I don't know, conversational style or tone, but anyway, the research that I wanted to pivot to, which was more focused on trauma, evidence of trauma and disease in African American and African community populations, particularly in urban environments. So this was, for me, was like New York, Philadelphia, those spaces that when I was growing up was told slavery didn't happen. And other teachers, by the way, have come to my bone lab and have said to me in Brooklyn, I never knew slavery happened here or people weren't enslaved here. And we're living literally in the spaces where this stuff happened. So there was a lot of sort of corrective work that needed to be done. And so I didn't find the transition from master's to PhD to be quite as easy. And I was just completely wrecked from working and paying rent and keeping the grades up and looking for my own opportunities, because New York is primate focused in terms of academia. So if you want to work in forensic anthropology, there are very, very few opportunities to do this. And without having extra support or added support or even mentorships that I didn't quite develop in school for a number of different reasons, I didn't find that transition to be super easy, but the SciComm thing was working out really, really well. And so I decided to take a break away from academia mainly because I needed to work. I needed money. I needed insurance to get that mental health right after grad school too. And then decided to continue on with SciComm and looking for those opportunities. And they actually intersect with academia in ways that I never even imagined. And for me, I take a lot of pride in being a person that spent my whole academic career never meeting another Black woman bioanthropologist until a chance meeting, going from that to being, for hundreds of kids, the first anthropologist that they ever have met and that they ever connect anthropology to is this dark-skinned Black girl from East New York, Brooklyn. So I decided to continue that work as my focus, and I have not closed the door at all on a PhD life, but for now, that is my focus.
Thank you so much, Myeashea. You have such an interesting story. I actually wanted to share with you, I don't think I've told you, but I've known about, the rockstar anthropologist for a long time before, I had the courage to even talk to you because I was so impressed. But I just wanted to plug it in there. And everyone in the audience definitely has to go and check out the Rockstar Anthropologist. It's an amazing blog. I love it so much. But thank you for sharing your story. And people in the audience, please send in your questions. We'll get back to them after everyone has finished their stories. So Delande, tell us about your journey into BioAnth.
Oh, my journey into BioAnth. Okay. Tough to follow, Myeashea. You're so dynamic. I hope that I can, offer something at least, 1/4 of that interesting. So I'll just be honest. When Dad kindly asked me to join the panel, I immediately asked her back, like, I'm a graduate student. What do I have to say? Like, how can I speak on my path when I'm still finding out what it is, right? So I wrote some notes that I'll be reading from, and I hope that I hope that something is interesting from what I have to say. All right. So my interest in the human body goes back as far as I can remember. And while I thought my entry point into human biology and the sciences would be neurology, my appreciation for the nervous system eventually came second to my love for the skeletal system. My bioanthropological training began in undergrad courses from human origins, human osteology, and even those classes that focused on excavations of the classical world. I started off as a Mediterraneanist, and because that's where the most relevant research opportunities at my university were at the time. And continuing to build along that path during an excavation in the Balearic Islands, for which I was assisting with the exhumation of human remains as well as their analyses. During an evening lecture, one of the directors had mentioned, well, part of his lecture was talking about his leading theories for the site we were excavating at, right? And what really stuck with me was him stating that one of the leading theories was that this site was affiliated with the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, which officially ended in 1492 with the death of the last emirate. And so my brain starts firing off these connections. I'm thinking, well, if the Iberian Peninsula kind of like regained power in 1492, what are the sort of connections between, what are the possibilities within how this energy of conquest might have played a role in the same 1492 expeditions from that same peninsula to the New World, which ended up, expediting native genocide and expanding the transatlantic slave trade, right? So it was from this point that I began to more broadly, transnationally, and even diasporically think about the interlocking and overlapping relations of colonial violence. And more importantly, its detriment on the bodies of its victims and those who lie in its wake. It is from this point that I began to think about or try to explore what sort of bioarchaeological interventions are being made in this respect, right? And I came upon the work of scholars like Leslie Rankin Hill, Michael Blakey, Rachel Watkins, who's my advisor, also grateful, and Carlene De La Cova. And I began to try to situate my own research and my own expertise within this kind of like Americanist focus. How can I bring the tools and the knowledge that I learned from honing my skills in what they call the old world to the different, the plethora of issues that we face right here in the new world, right? So here I am, I begin to engage in research, both in the US and the Caribbean, and I start my journey of thinking alongside and thinking with scholars who really mobilize their disciplinary expertise to confront, the vast and varied violations of slavery and its afterlives, those back then, and also the ways they plague our life and living even to this day. Which brings me to my current work. Right now, as part of my doctoral program, my dissertation research is actually on a site in Georgetown, the wealthiest neighborhood of Washington, D.C. And lo and behold, as I had mentioned in my introduction, these constant, rediscoveries of burial grounds. What my leading theory is that this block of multi-million-dollar homes might in fact be sitting upon an unmarked Black burial ground, and worsely, it might have also been, even before these houses were built over it, it might have still been reused while it was still, a burial ground for the 1832 cholera epidemic. So you have this kind of like double violation. Even when that ground was in use to bury African descendant people, it was still, reused by the city. And then on top of that, buried over and multi-million-dollar homes arise, right? So with that being the long and short of it, I also wanted to take some time to bring attention to something that my fellow panelists and I were discussing earlier this week. And it's, sometimes there can be a way that we kind of pre-package these narratives from our different paths in a way that sometimes gloss over or sidestep not as much our identities as Black bioanthropologists, but more so how being Black specifically, and for me, coming into a space of studying Blackness itself, impacted how we attempt to navigate the different terrains of our field. So I'd like to offer some vignettes, if you will, that might offer some keener insights into what some of those impacts look like for me. So, April 2014, I've taken it upon myself to learn more about the history. I've taken it upon myself, to learn more about the history of the discipline, as I can count only on one hand the number of classes I had taken that gave any attention to what one professor called our difficult roots. As I absorb the terrors and atrocities brought on by the fathers, founders, and foregrounders of our discipline, I reach out to one of my former professors to ask for some direction in how I might shape my practice in ways that counter these often racist foundations. He replies to me, "The Association of Physical Anthropologists has a statement on race, released sometime in the late 90s. So many of us just find it best to stay away from this topic because it can be tricky." That's entirely that response. So, August 2019, at my current university, a faculty member and I, we joined a planning committee formed after an open call for scholars to help construct an exhibition around loosely framed diversity. Once in this meeting, we learned that the idea for said exhibition is to curate a collection of 23andMe tests taken by volunteer participants, alongside images and visual representations that portray, how they see cultural diversity. So in this meeting, I feel compelled to call attention to, the history of racialized science, especially in relation to the colonial history of the museum and spaces like it. Another committee member responds to me with, "While we appreciate the input from the humanities, we need to consider how the scientists would approach this." So here I want to draw a parallel to one of my favorite scholars, Catherine McKittrick, who's a geographer, and she posits that there's a certain way that when Black bodies occupy a space not originally designated for them, they can often be rendered what she calls ungeographic when they begin to take up space. Here I was, an entire, what I thought, bioanthropologist, being rendered what I call unscientific. My first internship out of college was in a lab where I was solely had to dissect the lower limbs of cadavers to run biomechanical tests where we were trying to study muscle development and human locomotion, all in the name of science. my excavations from Mediterranean deserts to Caribbean jungles, exhuming tombs amid snakes, scorpions, thorns, and thickets, my best friend became sunburns, all in the name of science. While I call attention to these, however, when I call attention to the issues of race, racism, and racializations, when I contribute to the conversation from my standpoint, in the words of Paula Giddens, from when and where I enter, I am rendered unscientific. And lastly, because I'm talking a lot, November 2020, not too long ago, I get a call from one of my collaborators who worked for the District of Columbia, and her words are, "We've been FOIA'd." Now, blame my ignorance, I don't know what she's talking about, but what she means is that the project we're working on, the very same Georgetown project, someone had submitted a Freedom of Information Act, filed one of those against our project with the claims and accusations that we're not only lying, but we're purposefully withholding information from the community. We come to find out that what's actually happening is that this individual, who is neither a historian, biologist, anthropologist, archaeologist, no formal training in how this work is done, has been doing his own side project over the past few years on Black history in that part of DC. And so what he wants is for this information to bring in this information to bolster his own work, to bolster his own profile. So here we have with this issue, and I can't help but thinking, the first Black individual to earn a PhD in anthropology and also in physical anthropology, William Montague Cobb, right? He what Cobb ran into this issue, in his article, he talks about this in his article, Race and Runners, where he was trying to dispel these biological parameters of how the Black body is superior to others, these building on these scientific racist ideals. And he's working with Jesse Owens, trying to undo this frame of thought. And he is being hounded by this reporter, or this writer, if you will, asking him to please explain to him exactly what he's doing, how he's doing it, take him through the science. And this reporter, no training in this field, but is trying to extract from Black scholarship, Black intellectual labor to bolster his own profile. And, I can't help but think to myself, it's oftentimes hard enough to often be the only Black person in the room when this research is happening. Double that with the understanding that these remains were disrespected, disparaged, denigrated, and disregarded solely because when they were alive, they looked like me. So to add on top of that, these issues of bureaucracy, of ego, and so on, it brings me to this space of thinking about the different registers of labor and the different aspects of trials and tribulations that we go through as Black bioanthropologists and as Black scientists more broadly that don't often reach, the surface of our stories. And to end, I just wanted to say that as I'm thinking through, my different pathways, journeys, and legacies, as the flyer so aptly puts it, I find myself constantly asking how much longer I'll be longing to belong.
Thank you so much, Delande. That was really amazing. And thank you for sharing a deeper look into your journey. And I think that's something we all wanted to do today, is to not just, sugarcoat our journey and actually share the reality. And I think you did that so well. Thank you. Allison, could you share your journey with us now?
Sure, that was great, Delande. Hopefully things like this will help us kind of continue on the journey and kind of create spaces, not just a week, but who knows, monthly, yearly kind of things of togetherness that can happen. My journey is a bit more, I think of it as linear. So I probably went to college knowing that I didn't want to be a doctor, but something science. I come from a family of, my dad has a PhD, family with health professionals, educators, things like that. And I remember after our discussion of what we were going to talk about, trying to think about, okay, what was my origin story in anthropology? And it was on the track. I ran track in college, and hearing one of my teammates at Duke were stretching, and she was talking about this class in the lower extremity. So it was a dissection class as an undergraduate. And I thought, oh, I like this section. I like evolution. What is this that you're doing? I thought I was just going to be a bio major. So it turns out that then I majored in biological anthropology and anatomy at Duke, the morphology track. So I didn't, sorry, Dag, I don't like the primates that way. I like them to move, not to be on other parts of land. But kind of liking morphology and taking anatomy courses and being fortunate enough to be at a medical school that has those things. And then in a program similar to when I went to my PhD, where you have people that are anthropologists that are teaching anatomy and kind of applying their skills in different ways as morphologists. So doing research in the field, but then also doing research, movement, kinematics, those types of things. So then I took, if I go my long path, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was graduating, some like family things in college and whatnot. My mom was sick and then she died. So I was like, I don't know what I want to do and probably need to take some time off. But I knew I liked anatomy, and I had taken like a year of osteology and I liked it, and I realized I was good at it. And my dad gave me a good piece of advice that said, well, if you like it, then figure out, what you can do with it and how far you can go and do it. And I thought, oh, all right. So maybe that means a master's or a PhD or something. So I applied for mostly anatomy and kind of skeletal bio master's programs. And ended up going to Mercyhurst College at the time, now university, to do forensic anthropology. Factoid thing of why I applied. I think the application was free and it was online, and the deadline might have been, I'd missed other deadlines, even though I was trying to be organized. So something out there for grad programs for me to think about. Although I was fortunate for money wasn't necessarily that much of an issue, but I'm still cheap. So why would I pay $60 to file a piece of paper if I didn't have to? I think that's silly. But going to Mercyhurst, I think of it as a kind of a pre-doct program because we did anthropology, we did osteology, we were working cases and things, and in the field, we did a lot of work, took a lot of classes, and exposed to archaeology that I hadn't really done before, as well as the forensics things, but I still liked the more morphology side. And that led me to then PhDs and same thing of morphology programs and or some kind of functional anatomy, which I got at Stony Brook and IDPAS, where I ended up going and finishing after many years. But the good thing about it was that I knew I wanted to do anatomy, so I was focused on programs that also had anatomy. Seeing people getting jobs from it and also knowing that I liked it kind of broadened my opportunities from what I could do, so BioAnth as well as anatomy. And that's always kind of my advice for students of you can't just pigeonhole into one area. You have to have something else that you can do. I wish I was better at stats, but if doing stats and coding, maybe LaShanda will talk about bioinformatics and give us that kind of advice, whether it's genetics or hormones, or you have to kind of have something else in your bag that can go with the intro stuff as well, or human evolution. And now I am at the University of Missouri teaching. It's kind of a short story. I was thinking of the challenges and the struggles, and I went to Catholic school most of my life, all of my life, too, before Duke. So I've always been the very few of the Black person, if not the only Black person in those spaces. So it wasn't as hard of a transition. I think going then into college and then graduate schools, and you probably become either not desensitized, but you choose your battles of which of the microaggressions and which of the nonsense you're going to talk about whatever day or whatnot. Although if anyone out there knows me, I'm usually pretty blunt and forward that whatever they said wasn't acceptable or not, which can get me into trouble. But thinking of challenges, I don't think a lot of them were, at least they didn't rise to my surface, that they were necessarily racist along the path. For me, particularly in BioAnth, it seemed like a lot of them were sexist. I couldn't tell if it was, you see men, particularly white men, having different opportunities and advantages, or I don't know, I'm choosing my words, but or certain white women particularly seem to have different opportunities or behavior that might not be acceptable generally, maybe then been tolerated. And I think some of that comes from just also building relationships, and if your advisor or mentor is like there to support you or not, so those types of things. So I couldn't like rack my brain for this was the kind of racist email that I got this day either, like Delande was talking about. I didn't necessarily have those, but I think it's the instances of things that you're like, well, why did that happen, or how did that go for someone versus someone else? And you know, I think the challenges have always been of just relating and just dealing with difficult people in general would be, I think, some of the largest challenges at whatever phase that you're at in your career. And like truly difficult people, like some of them toxic people that, you know, everyone has to kind of deal with, which helps you on the path. And I think the one kind of stumbling block that, and I was kind of emailing back and forth with my advisor today actually, and she left. So my advisor, after I proposed, left. And then my co-advisor retired maybe like a year later and moved like, you know, 12 hours away. And so that was on my like third on-campus advisor, which I guess for some students, you know, can lead to disaster. And it certainly probably extended my stay on Long Island, just not having someone there, and maybe different mentoring opportunities. But I think it also helps you kind of guide your own independent research or, you know, determine your own tasks for things that you're going to eventually do as a professor or whatnot. You know, you are in control of your own time and your own schedule. So I don't think it necessarily slowed me down, but, you know, especially on the job market, maybe you didn't have that advisor to talk to, but at the same time, it was good to be in a large graduate program where there were plenty of faculty members and you just had to ask. Or some of them even said, let's go to coffee, like, let's talk about your interview. And so people kind of absorb and help you in that kind of area. So I was pretty fortunate along that line, and also fortunate because of anatomy that I had funding on those entire 7 years. And even my master's program, which they don't do anymore, I was funded. So we had, I think maybe a year or two after we ended up leaving, they got rid of the fellowships, but it was a master's program where you got funding and from a private school. I did have to work in the gym my first year. So it was like, I was assistant manager of the gym. And my hours were all crazy. I was like closing the gym or opening it some mornings, but it was a job and it was a little tiny stipend, but the tuition was the most expensive thing. So it covered tuition, and you can live in Erie, Pennsylvania, not so badly with costs and things. So I think that's my journey to Missouri, and that's where I'm at now.
Thank you so much, Allison. That is really interesting, and I think we wanted you to be on this panel because of your unique path of going from BioAnth into anatomy, which I guess goes hand in hand, but thank you for sharing. We've been getting some really amazing questions. I just wanted to remind the audience to keep sending in the questions, and we'll get to them after everyone is finished talking about their journey. Danae, it's your turn to share your journey.
Great. I've really enjoyed hearing other people's journeys, and like the points of connection to it reminds me as other people share, reminds me of a lot of things that are part of my experience as well. I'm really fortunate. I had two parents that were very encouraging and open in terms of what I could study and what they encouraged me to study. My dad got a master's degree in philosophy of science, my mom in literature. They actually met in grad school. So intellectually, I've always been encouraged to pursue things, follow my interests and the things that grabbed me. And one of the things that grabbed me when I was young, I like reading science fiction a lot. And I was captivated by this book by James P. Hogan called Inherit the Stars. And part of the plot of this book, or the intro, is that there's this moon mission where they discover a skeleton in a spacesuit on the planet of the moon, on the moon, sorry, not Mars. But the skeleton turns out to be 20,000 years old. And so the whole book unravels around this mystery of trying to solve a particular question, like how did this ancient skeleton arrive in this place? And it's that type of question that has always grabbed me. How do you solve this kind of mystery about the past? and what are the tools for answering questions about the past and where do we come from. And I grew up in Chicago and was very fortunate in high school to also have a class in psychology that was taught by a wonderful instructor and really got me engaged with the question of how do you come to understand, or what can you understand about people and cultures from the things that they make and leave behind, like their material culture. So these kinds of mysteries about the past and what that tells us about who we are today, about identity, about our place in the world, that's always been what has interested me. And so I had an internship when I was in high school with a psychiatrist, actually. And she was like this, I mean, she was like a caricature of a psychiatrist, like this Austrian woman with her hair back in a bun, you know, the whole thing. And I was starting to apply for college, and she said, "What are you interested in?" I said, "Well, I'm really interested in what you can tell about people from the kind of things they make and their material culture." She said, "Well, that's biological anthropology," which isn't totally correct. It's more like archaeology, but that got me into a bioanthro class my first year of college at the University of Michigan, and I've loved it ever since. And I've always really wanted to explore the world and travel and see different places. And so this was also an opportunity to do that and to experience how other people see the world. I think one of the most beautiful things about anthropology is that ability the way in which it encourages you to put yourself in other people's shoes and to see the world from a different perspective. And I think that's really important. I think the world needs more of that too. So I went through my undergraduate as a biological anthropologist from kind of day one, and had wonderful exposure to a lot of people who really encouraged me. Struggled along the way, almost didn't graduate because I ran out of money my freshman year. After my first year, actually, ran out of funding. Had to leave college for a year to go work and raise more money and come back. I got super lucky and learned early on, while I was on campus working, trying to raise money for tuition, I was involved with a political action group of Black activists at the University of Michigan. Most of them were graduate students. They taught me a lot about activism. They taught me a lot about interacting with institutions. And one day they hosted kind of a roundtable, kind of a discussion about funding and financial aid for students, especially for students of color. And I was able to actually kind of share my challenges and with, somebody directly in the financial aid office who was willing to help me. And that made a huge difference. I don't think I would have made it through if it wasn't for that person, actually. And sometimes when I reflect on my path, I think of all the ways in which it really could have gone different. So I did manage to graduate. And I took a year off of after I graduated in anthropology to work for a while, and then started to apply to graduate school. I was pretty sure I really wanted to do anthropology and apply to graduate school, but I almost didn't apply. And I remember these like intense feelings of like just questioning, like, am I even worthy for graduate school? Am I, like, is this something I can really do? Do I really belong in this? And it was almost enough to prevent, I almost self-censored myself from applying to graduate school. But then I thought, doesn't make sense for you to tell yourself you can't do something. It makes more sense. If you're gonna reach that obstacle, you might as well have somebody else tell you can't do something. So so I applied to graduate schools and ended up going to IDPAS at Stony Brook, and that was a challenging experience, a rich one. It was it's a challenging program to get through. It's very demanding, but I felt very fortunate to have a lot of colleagues in my cohort and in the graduate program that I could talk to, but I was also really aware of being the only person of color in a graduate program at the time. And that sense of isolation was really difficult. So that sense of not always feeling like you're an outsider is kind of a pressing and continual challenge. And it continues today. So one of the things that's really stuck with me from my graduate experience was how important it is to kind of build that sense of community and to be able to have others to talk and share with. And I think that's true for all graduate students. And I just think it's quadruply true for students of color. You really need that. You need that, yeah, that human contact and people who are willing to kind of, yeah, share your, you know, some familiarity. And there's a way in which, you know, just going through the world, sometimes the people I feel closest to or most free to be myself around are my family or other people of color. And that's not always easy. That networking and that community is not always easy to access. I was really fortunate to have a fellowship where there are other that brought together other students of color at Stony Brook. So I got to meet other people in STEM, and that was a really good program. That actually kind of was really important. It was a big part of getting through that program. And later on, I had a Ford Foundation fellowship as well for my dissertation, for writing up my dissertation, and that community has also been really important for me and going forward. And it's made me kind of appreciate how important mentoring is. And for a lot of us, you know, I think who go through academia, we also have a strong sense of the importance of giving back. And I've experienced that and feel I'll recognize how important that is, and like the desire to create the opportunities to do that. And I think something like, you know, Black and BioAnth Week is something I'm really grateful for and happy to see happen. I graduated from Stony Brook after doing, well, a year and a half of fieldwork in Tanzania, which was fantastic. For me, that was super empowering. I had kind of my own vision of what it is I really wanted to do. I've always had a pretty clear idea of the kinds of questions I wanted to ask and how I wanted to address them. And that's been kind of an anchor for me. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get the funding to go do that field work. So I spent a year and a half in Tanzania. I also learned a lot from Tanzanians, from spending a year in a place. You know, I grew up mostly in the US and didn't have a chance to travel internationally until I had a chance to go to East Africa once before that. But that being able to live and work in Africa, and to experience what it's like to really be one in a place that isn't totally dominated by marketing and billboards everywhere. I don't know how to explain. There's something relaxing about not always being subjected to marketing, but then also to to be in Africa and what that's like, and to experience how Africans kind of relate to one another, and to kind of, it helps you gain an awareness about the colonial impacts on Africa and notions of identity and self, but then also like the very nuanced notions of identity that at least Tanzanians have about each other and about tribal affinities and language affinities, all of which are way more salient than these kind of crude, like racialized categories that, you know, we have in the US. And so getting to experience that and appreciate that nuance was really important. But I struggled when I came back to finish my dissertation, had a lot to do. I was fortunate that because I, you know, got through IDPAS, having the training in anatomy allowed me to work as an anatomist. It's in Brooklyn, at SUNY Downstate, and at CUNY to kind of pay the bills and get through. And then, and then I went on and was fortunate enough to do a postdoc at the Smithsonian. And then from there, get a job at UT. I've been at UT now for 10 years and a little over 10 years. And there's a lot that you could say for the challenges of being a junior academic as well, and the struggles of getting tenure. That was at some point a challenge for me. And a lot of work, but that's, you know, that's academia in a sense. That's not unusual. But again, you know, that feeling of isolation, and that it's weird because I would have sometimes, it was it wasn't until more recently that I really came to appreciate how important it was to reestablish that sense of community, even across subdisciplines within anthropology. So UT is a 4-field anthropology program, and you know, I've been making a much more concerted effort to reach out to my colleagues in social cultural and linguistic and other branches and subfields of anthropology to connect and to help kind of inform the way in which what I'm doing as a biological anthropologist, like how the exploration of human evolution is really kind of meaningful to like my own sense of identity and what it means, like humanity and place in the world. And so that's been really enriching. And it's weird that I don't always get that in my conversations with other biological anthropologists, but that's really enriched when it's engaged with other aspects of anthropology. And so that's also been a big support. But again, that's also a very isolating kind of experience. And what's also kind of unique in my path is that, you know, I don't specifically study, say, race as a topic of interest in my research. It's definitely in the background. It's an aspect of my experience as a biological anthropologist, but I think maybe for many of us, it's struck by kind of the difference of compared to, say, archaeologists or social cultural anthropologists that make that the focus of their work and the kind of difference that brings with it. I was really fortunate to connect to some wonderful people doing research in Ethiopia. My friend Zerai, he's been a close friend and collaborator now for decades, and that's been really fortunate. And so also having that kind of, it's weird in the way in which, again, those connections like Tanzania and Ethiopia have really helped lifted some of the burden of that sense of isolation, and kind of mitigated some of that sense of like detachment and identity, which is, I don't know, for those of us who, I don't know if this one of the perennial struggles for people of color in the US is like trying to find an identity that works in the sense of allowing you to feel like a positive notion of identity associated with, you know, being an American that you know, in a country that has such a challenging and problematic history. So those things of, yeah, that's always a struggle. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got where I am today, and my focus now is on how to make this opportunity more widely available to more people. And more importantly, to enrich my field and our discipline with voices that have so much to contribute. So I see it less as about, you know, kind of creating, I want to create opportunities, but I want to create opportunities to better our field. And I think we're missing out on a lot.
Thank you so much, Denny. I think that was a powerful message to end on. And thank you for speaking about community. I think that is something we really don't talk about in academia. And it is very meaningful and actually helps you do your work and be the, you know, an amazing researcher when you have a supportive community around you. Thank you. LaShanda, thank you for waiting patiently. Can you please share your story with us?
Sure, no problem. I've also enjoyed listening to everyone's stories. It's helped me realize how unique my sort of pathway into biological anthropology and beyond is. So I grew up in Virginia on low-income housing. I grew up in a single parent home, single mom, and it was rough. I had always been interested in music, so I learned how to play the violin, the piano. By the time I was probably like eight or nine, I continued to be in orchestra for all of middle school and some of high school. I competed in dance competitions and things like that. So my younger self is really confused by my current trajectory right now. I honestly do not remember why I decided to major in anthropology. I think I was going through the list of majors, and at the time I knew I didn't like math and I didn't like science, and the definition of anthropology was probably cool to me, because I remember deciding anthropology pretty when I had applied. So VCU had a 4-field anthropology program at the time. So there was only one biological anthropologist there, who I took a handful of classes with, but a lot of my undergraduate training was the other fields of anthropology, as well as sociology, women's studies, African American studies. I think I took a couple art history classes. Very sort of humanities focused. It wasn't until my final year, I think, when I took a molecular anthropology class, and I think the Neanderthal genome had just come out at the time. I was like, wow, this is so cool. I had just finished some osteology sort of lab work as well. But I didn't actually decide to pursue graduate school right after. I knew it was a thing, but I didn't see myself in graduate school by the time I was finished with my bachelor's. I ended up trying to get a job, and I would say that's probably the first time where I experienced overt racism, just because my name's very Black sounding, associated. I remember having my full name, Black and Proud, on resumes and not hearing back from them. And then I recalled a lecture in African American Studies where the professor had faced the same, and she ended up just using her initials. So for about a year, or maybe 8 months after I had graduated, I was just L.R. Williams on my resume. And I ended up getting offered one position as a substitute teacher. So I taught special ed science for about a year, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And somehow, I don't actually recall how, but I was really interested in finding a program that had a geneticist and some sort of skeletal biologists on staff. So probably about a year out of me applying for graduate school, I just started doing research. And then I ended up applying for NYU, getting offered a position in their master's program. And I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but during the osteology courses, and especially forensic anthropology, I was kind of left wanting more. So I worked with Todd Disotell, who was my advisor at the time, to sort of figure out what I wanted to do. And he just started to give me books, because I remember saying, you know, I'm interested in microbes. And he was like, what kind? And I was like, viruses. And then he just like handed me a book off his shelf on viruses. And my final year at VCU, the Middle Eastern respiratory coronavirus had just emerged in the Middle East. It causes pneumonia, but it has a pretty high mortality rate. It was also probably the first disease where scientists were actually able to put out genome sequences pretty fast with isolation. So I was interested in looking at how it evolved. And as sequences were coming out, they were coming from different hosts. And so eventually I wanted to explore the ecology of the virus as well as see if I could identify any sort of host switching. So that would be host switching from bats, in this case camels, and then to humans. And while I was at NYU, I developed this collaboration with NYU Medical School because I wanted to get a little bit more training in bioinformatics. So I ended up developing this collaboration with the microbiome group there and working on a project on the howler monkey gut microbiome, which at the time was probably one of the first primate gut microbiomes to be analyzed. So I worked on that and really just used it as an opportunity to learn how to code and just kind of expand my horizons for the wonderful world of microbes. And I had initially applied to work with a virologist at Rutgers because we had talked about expanding this MERS coronavirus project, and there were so many different genomes coming. Like there was a lot of excitement, at least on our end. Sort of within the first couple of years of my PhD at Rutgers, it was very clear it was only on my end. And so I guess looking back, I had a really good and fast ability to pivot. So I was like, well, I know a little bit about microbiomes, and I have studied anthropology for like 6 years. Let's see if I can put these two together in some way. So I did. I was inspired by some work on the Neolithic oral microbiome and decided that I wanted to look at the evolution of the oral microbiome. Note, my advisor was a virologist. And in the beginning, I think that she meant well, but it was very clear sort of halfway through that she was not going to be very helpful. Neither were some of the collaborators that I had met in completion of my dissertation. And so I'm try to word this right. I did not have in whole, I didn't have a very pleasant experience in graduate school. Again, kind of going back to my advisor being a virologist, she couldn't use any of her grants that she had currently had to fund any of my work. So I had to hustle. Any sort of special trainings that I wanted to participate in, I had to find the money to do that. All of the sort of I don't want to call it field work, but going to museums and collecting specimens, I had to find a way to pay for that too. And of course, sequencing is very expensive. So it ended up being a lot of money. So I just really had to sort of go through it all alone. So it was very isolating. And during that time, I got really depressed. And so I had admitted myself into a hospital about actually 2 months before my defense date. Just very depressed and trying to get any sort of help, trying to find any sort of light at the end of the tunnel. So I was in the hospital for about a week. And again, this was like two months out of my defense date. So I put those coping skills to work. So things like meditation and yoga and just breath work, just not only just saved my life, but got me able to, 2 months later, be able to defend my thesis. So I did that in 2019, but by the end of graduate school, I was like, I hate academia. I'm never going back. But I ended up doing a year of postdoctoral work because I knew no matter which avenue, if I wanted to continue in academia or teach or even work in industry, they want you to have at least 1 year as working at a postdoc, in a postdoc position. So I stayed for exactly 1 year and was counting down the months. I was on an NIH fellowship, and it was one of the ones where if you quit early, you would have to pay back whatever money was left over that you still owed. So you literally had to complete the entire year, or you would owe the NIH money. And so that was also why I ended up having to stay for a single year. And boy, as soon as I could punt out of academia, it's just like I started practicing coding, learning R, learning Python, trying to figure out how web pages worked. I started revamping my LinkedIn, just finding people on LinkedIn to talk to figure out how they sort of made their transition from academia to industry. Talking to some recruiters, because in industry, you're more likely to be recruited by someone who works for a company, and just kind of learning all of that and what it entails. And just, I remember talking to one recruiter, and she was like, so what benefits are you looking for? And I was like, health insurance? And she was like, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's your benefits package is definitely gonna include health insurance. But is there anything else? And I was like, does it include dental? And just the stock options and like equity and companies, relocation costs, companies paying for you to set up your home office, unlimited time off, all of these things. Some people the recruiter told me that one person she had talked to was like, the company has to offer yoga several times a week for me to work there. And here I was saying I just wanted health insurance. And so I eventually ended up coming to EMD Serono just from working my network on LinkedIn. And there, I quickly find out that everything that academia prepares you for is pretty useless for industry. Like they kind of want the exact opposite of what the academy is looking for. So like publications, they're more interested in projects. So, you can't, if you said, my dissertation was 3 chapters. So telling them that, look at this dissertation, it's beautiful dissertation, I made figures. To them, that's one project. Split it into 3 separate projects. Now you got their attention. And also certifications, like things that you find online, things like Data Camp, Data Quest, LinkedIn Learning, those actually go a long way in sort of making your case that you have these skills. What else did I learned? Yeah, and also I Another thing I would recommend if you want to transition into industry is sort of figure out, explore that option early because of what they desire is so different. You have to more showcase your skills than to show off your publications and your grant money. So just exploring, I mean, there's industry offers so many different internships. Summer is coming, at least in bioinformatics groups, they tend to call them co-ops. So heads up, look for co-ops. Those are internships and they actually pay pretty well. So right now, I started at AMD Serono, Merck, last September, and it has been amazing. I feel like I'm finally being compensated for what I bring to the table. I feel like I'm being listened to, like I actually have expertise that's valuable. I really like just, I think in academia, I felt kind of siloed and isolated, but industry is very much, everything's a group effort. During meetings, you know, you're updating the group on your projects and you're looking for suggestions and using that meeting to create other meetings to talk about your projects. So it's totally different, at least in my experience. They pay you well, which is also great. So yeah, that's my story. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, LaShanda. My voice is going, but I think that was so very powerful and something we really need to do more of is really share of ourselves in these spaces. And thank you so much for sharing your story. I have a bunch of questions coming in. I've been trying to kind of read through. I'll start with the personalized questions, so the ones that are specific for a specific person, and then just the more general ones that anyone who wants to answer can answer. So one of the first is for you, Myeashea. The question is, after hustling so hard for so many years, do you or have you ever wished it was any easier? Do you wish your path was more linear?
Of course, I like easy things too. I didn't intend to spend my entire 20s in a book or working and never going on spring break or pushing off relationships and not actually developing social skills for a really long time. That was not my intention at all. I was doing what I thought was the best thing and the thing that was going to get me to the path that I thought I was supposed to be on. And it really did. I don't regret anything. Like, it was wonderful. And now I'm in a position where I have this one thing that I completely control that has to do so wonderfully with anthropology. I can be as deep into a subject as I want to, or not. I can express or share my excitement about a specific form of research in so many different ways. And so I don't feel limitless there. It is a labor of love because I don't get paid for this work. I have not monetized it, but even the choice not to monetize it has been completely my own because I wanted to be sure when the time came for me to monetize it, I could do it in a way that felt right for me and that I could keep up with. And so when people would say to me, you could get grants for this, people would love to, pay you for this. And I was like, they should love to pay me for this. I'm doing great work, right? And it also had to get to the point where I had to be okay with saying that about myself, that I was doing something that was valuable. But at the same time, when you start to give over those types of controls to people or get people to invest or whatever, they may not have the same interest as you, or they might want to see a different return than you do. And for me, I think the hardest thing about all of it, right, I wouldn't have cared remotely about the hustle at all if I felt that I was as well loved by the academic base that I wanted to be so much a part of, as I loved it. And that to me was like the hardest reality. Was I was doing these things that people say you're supposed to do. Like, I'm working 60 hours. I'm doing what I can to not take any money from the school. I'm funding my own projects. I'm finding my own field schools. I'm at University Tennessee of Knoxville every other summer. I'm finding ways to go help in Europe. I'm getting internships. And people are like, how are you doing this? Pure willpower, right? And then when you go and you're like, do you want me to be your PhD student? Do you want to partner with me? And they're like, your GRE is low. No. Like, what does that even mean? I have an entire body of work and 4 degrees. What does it matter? Right? But that's a nice way of saying, like, no, we don't want to mess with you. And that's fine too. And I think the part that hurt me most is that they were so willing to be so supportive when I was willing to do the work that they wanted me to when I was willing to go up to the Viking range in Norway and excavate there, or when I was willing to work for the New York PD. It's like, oh yeah, you're great, we want you there. But then the minute I started to assert myself in a different way and say, actually, I'm really interested in the paths of this population of people who have long had their narrative stolen or remixed or erased, and then I became a problem. So I think that when I worked that hard to be seen and to be taken seriously, and then to be told that's not like a worthy endeavor, or to not feel like I can reach out to the people that I see doing the work, and I'm still so scared because I'm intimidated because I've been told I wasn't good enough, that hurts. If things worked out really well, or at least in the way I thought they would have, I would have not questioned the struggle, the grind, none of it. It would have all been worth it to me. It still is, because I still have this wonderful thing and I've built this incredible community. And now those same people that told me no are like, can you come talk to our school? Or can you come teach this class? Can you lecture here? And I'm like, oh yeah, me and my, master's degree will just come through, right? But yeah, no regrets here. I did what I had to do.
Thank you so much, Myeashea. That is a real thing. Sometimes you appreciate the journey, but it would also be nice if it was easier. But thank you for answering that question. The second one I have is for Denis. I'll read it out to you. Dr. Reed, you mentioned that you almost prevented yourself from pursuing your doctorate. I also question whether more schooling is an option for me. What led you to just go for it, and what advice do you have for people in the same position where cost and your identity causes doubt?
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge sometimes to overcome yourself. Sometimes we are our biggest obstacle. And so developing that like sense of worth and that willing, I think, the best way for me, what shifted my thinking about it was a willingness to say, I'm not going to tell myself I can't. I'm going to wait for somebody else to tell me. I'm going to trust that I'm going to, go after what I want and what I think is worth doing. And that also, something Myeashea said also stuck with me too, like that, that the way in which you can follow a passion for yourself. So the more you can stoke within yourself, like a passion for something that you're doing, and people will, they'll appreciate if you're doing one thing that they think you should be doing, that may not be the thing that you want to do. So having your own sort of guiding light, it's a tough thing to cultivate, you know. But again, not letting other people just, you know, yeah, not getting in your own way, and is a really important part of it.
Thank you for answering. I have one for LaShanda. It's about the industry, basically. And the question is, what does industry entail? What kind of research is used and highlighted?
Ooh, that is a difficult question to answer, because there's so many different pathways, especially if you're more of a molecular anthropologist. And I mean, I would note that there's sort of a difference in between, depending on the size of the company that you want to work for. So there's sort of like smaller startups that they tend to have more singular focus, say in some autoimmune disease. I tend to look at or keep track of the ones that study the microbiome. They're very sort of specific in focus versus a place like Pfizer or EMD Serono, which is the US branch of Merck. Regeneron, I mean, they have, I mean, their departments, science departments and research departments are so large, and even the type of research that you can do can be just as diverse. So in my experience, I would say for both, their job descriptions aren't necessarily indicative of what they're looking for. So it's kind of like what Allison was saying, it's kind of good to sort of keep this sort of generalist type of attitude as you're going through graduate school and you're getting more specific and almost immersed into whatever the topic of your dissertation is. It's good to keep your eye on sort of the larger field, figure out what's going on, keep up your sort of coding skills, because at a smaller company, you can be doing the bench work, you could be doing your own bioinformatics, versus a large company like EMD Serono. You're, for the most part, if there's contract offerings, so that's kind of what I did, just to kind of figure out, you know, what even is this industry job. So they're actually really, really good pathways, and you can get a very, very good contract working as a bioinformatician, or a sort of a lab technician on a contract. And these contracts can also sort of turn over into more permanent positions. So they're kind of, I guess it's kind of like a grown version of an internship, just to kind of try it out. And then if they like you, you get to stick around. What else? So yeah, for larger companies, they have a plan of, because, you know, budgeting per department, they usually have a plan of what kind of project they're going to bring people onto. I'm working on autoimmune diseases, so analyzing them, different RNA seq, RNA microarray, DNA seq, a single cell RNA seq. Again, if you are a geneticist, you know, cast a wide net, keep up with all of the type of sequencing technologies that are emerging, because being able to understand them and articulate them, that you do understand them in an interview, is good enough to get your foot in the door, even if you haven't actually done the analysis yourself. So yeah, and also I would say another tip that I would offer if you are a bioinformatician or if you want to use all of these skill sets that you learn doing bioinformatics and apply them elsewhere. Data science is a really big field, so that's sort of, you know, analyzing data of sort of any kind. They tend to do large cluster hirings, and these are like large companies, and I've seen advertisements from mostly business places looking for data scientists. That's kind of a trickier industry to get into as someone who's been an academic. Data scientists don't necessarily need to have any sort of advanced degrees, and that also includes an undergraduate degree. There's a lot of data science boot camps. There's data science fellowships. If you're, you know, in graduate school and you want to get the skill set, there's quite a few data science fellowships that you can participate in to sort of get your foot in the door. They tend not to take someone who's like me, who's sort of like an applied bioinformatician. If my degree was actually in bioinformatics, that would help me sort of transition into data science, but it's not. And that industry does have a problem with it. I'll end my answer there, but definitely reach out to me if you want some more tips to get on in industry.
Thank you so much, LaShanda. That was very insightful. I have a more open general question for anyone who wants to answer it. The question is, I want to know if any of you have ever had thoughts about not being smart enough or good enough to study in the sciences, and if so, how did you overcome that kind of thinking? I think this ties in with what Denis had talked about a little earlier, but if anyone wants to answer this question.
I can. So definitely, I think everyone has some form of imposter syndrome, and it probably then changes at different time periods. You know, I might be confident about certain parts of my anatomy right now, but there might be other things that I don't know as well or not as confident just because you don't do it every day. I think once you start to do something regularly, that also helps. But certainly like an undergrad when I was starting out, you know, going from high school where, you know, probably most of us maybe did really well in high school or had pretty good grades, you know, if the plan was always to go to college. So I never had to learn how to really study or how I learned. So my first couple years of college were definitely really hard. Figuring out, you know, taking chemistry and whatever I took at the same time, like calculus and probably too many lab and science courses that really hit my confidence just because it was so much time. I already had a lot of time taken up with sports and I just had never had to learn how to learn. So for me, it was kind of practicing. So just like I would practice a sport, it's been like I need to do as many problems as I can and put myself in the test environment because I then had major like test anxiety. So I could do the questions, you know, in lab, but then in exam time, it just poof, like gone. So that was something to kind of struggle and, you know, get through of, well, should I be doing this? Should I be here in science? I do think I like it, but can I get better? And actually, I think finding BioAnth helped me in that sense where, okay, maybe chemistry wasn't exactly for me or orgo, because I realized I didn't like small things. I like big things. So things that I can touch and manipulate and put together makes it a lot easier for me. And that's what kind of helped me moving forward and just practice doing something until I felt confident doing it.
Thank you so much, Allison. That was a really great answer. I have another question. Again, this is a general question. The question is, in the current pandemic environment and all the accompanying academic and socioeconomic disruption. Would any of you advise students to pursue an advanced degree in bioanthropology, especially when the field is currently moving towards strictly teaching anatomy in med schools and mostly not going into the field? What are some non-traditional work and other roles that you might suggest? I know that was a little long.
I mean, I'll just say that, so my undergraduate degrees were in anthropology and sociology. Then I got more focused and did a master's degree in anthropology. And so my PhD is actually in ecology and evolution. So I would say that if you wanted to change fields and sort of become more well-rounded as a biologist, I think ecology and evolution is sort of a good place for it. These departments are very diverse. Lots of, I would say, less people in ecology and evolution departments are sort of set into going into academia. More people have their eyes on industry, working for the government. So there's sort of also a diversity and sort of career trajectory as well. So in my experience, sort of doing a pivot to another biological science is definitely possible.
I'll jump in too and say, you know, sometimes I struggle with whether or not to recommend to prospective, let's say, graduate students, whether to pursue a career in academia. Given, you know, I think what's most important is to know going into it, you know, part of what you might be getting into, which is that it is a academia in general. Often few people really get through it. It's sort of a few people kind of get all the rewards in some ways. So it's it can be a really challenging profession to get into. I think having a lot of persistence really pays off. And sometimes, you know, students like really kind of being able to almost aggressively go after it, which is not easy for a lot of us, is a big part of it. But I also recommend to a lot of students to cultivate additional skills while you're in graduate school. Anatomy got me through for a long time. GIS and remote sensing. I've had jobs in engineering firms. I've had jobs teaching anatomy. And that has kind of helped me at various stages along the way stay in it. And that can be helpful too.
Thank you both for those great answers. Let me move on to the next question. So it's a little long, so that's why I'm taking a little bit.
I would say too, Dag, while you're shortening the question, I think there still are jobs in BioAnth. I mean, I occasionally check the job boards, and anyone that's a grad student or junior faculty, I'm sure does too. So there are jobs. It's just, what's the area you want to go into? You know, maybe if your field is very restricted, they might want to broaden it. But I wouldn't, if you're at the stage now where you'd be going in debt by pursuing a graduate degree, then yes, you might want to reconsider it or find an alternate passion.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to actually ask a shorter question first. What advice would you give a high school student planning to major in human evolutionary biology? I think all of you can answer
that. Previous advice. Find the money, and like I don't think people like, you know, find, if you can find, ask for money. Mistakes that I made in college were just not asking. Like I didn't realize that you could ask to do research, right? Everyone was so busy. I'm like, I don't want to interrupt this professor with their busy life and graduate students and whatnot. But they had projects. They probably had small things. You know, it looks good for them or us, right, to work and mentor students, particularly Black students. So if you are Black, like, take advantage. That sounds terrible, but it's some way you can take advantage of that for access and opportunity in kind of a, you know, win-win kind of situation for people, would be my advice.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what is the role of funding and granting agencies in assisting with aspects of social justice and doing no harm to Indigenous communities by making an effort to elicit from donors the ability to pay field workers? And basically, I think that's the rest is more common, that is it. So what's the role in these funding agencies in aspects of social justice and making sure to do no harm to Indigenous communities? So I think maybe Delande, you've mentioned a little bit, so might not be in other countries, but within the US, the work you do, maybe you can answer it.
I can attempt to. So the role of funding agencies, well, you know, there's oftentimes a trend that happens when social justice issues or civil unrest arises, that the funding agencies, you know, open up new calls for projects or a specific line of funding for projects that address these issues. But my question to these agencies would be, are you doing this funding? Are you allowing this extra, you know, pool of funding to support these projects because it amplifies how diverse you look, or are you actually reviewing these projects to make sure that you're funding something that isn't harming the communities? The number of times where I've seen I've seen projects that, you know, have a questionable edge to them, that's me putting it nicely, have funding from multiple agencies, you know, and these agencies who are these foundations who have such intense application processes. I can't help but think, how did this fall through the cracks, or is this something even being sought after by these foundations and other agencies? And that's not to say all, but it's definitely, you know, I would hope that when thinking of their role, I would hope that, you know, the role of like intention and why they're funding these projects would take priority, because you know, if yes, we can of course blame the scholar. We can of course say that this project had malintent, or even if it wasn't intentionally malicious, it still had, you know, negative effects. But some accountability needs to be placed on the person who, you know, fueled that project to happen.
Thank you, Delande. If any of you have worked outside of the country, maybe you could speak to that too. One of the comments accompanying the question was about paying wages to assistants in your field site and how funding agencies dictate that. So if that's something you want to tackle or touch upon.
Well, I haven't specifically been a part of the grant process for working in a field outside of the US. However, I was the recipient of a grant that allowed us to work in a field. And I know that this was in Cyprus. And in the city of Cyprus, one of the things that I noticed was that the standards operating procedures were a lot more strict than what I had encountered within the United States. And so I know that a lot of what had to do with what information we as individuals in the field were allowed to have, like versus what our field director was responsible for and what she could even tell us about what we were working on, versus then the person who gave her money and their agreement. There were very like clear lines about how we worked, what the expectation was. We were working definitely in a place where, I mean, we were in a cemetery, right? So that is sacred ground, especially in an area where they are highly religious. And so there was already this tension with having individuals that are cleaning and removing. We weren't truly removing the bodies from the graves. It's just that they're running out of space. And so they have to go into the ossuary, and because the ground shifts and moves, sometimes you get different body parts that don't necessarily belong to that individual. Also, their civil war had not happened too much in the past, so they would sometimes use those graves to disappear people. So you would have maybe 2 or 3 people in a singular grave, and of course this wouldn't get discovered until we were, out there doing the work. Those types of things would happen. But when we did work on specifically like forensic cases that would come in, we were really limited on what we were able to know. It was like, just tell us what you see, and then we go somewhere else and confirm it. And a lot of that had to do with the ethics behind how they did their work and what the expectations were. And so that was something I had never seen before in the US, but it seemed like my co-interns who were from England and especially in Australia, which I was shocked about, were just like, oh yeah, that's how it is. And so I guess it's like a country by country thing, but the United States might be quite far behind in how we approach ethics and at least field work and burials and that sort of thing.
Thank you so much, Myeashea. I know it's getting late and we've been here a while, but it's been wonderful. I wanted to actually end it with one last question, and I think it's kind of a fitting last question. And the question is, what advice would you give to Black undergrads, Black PhD students entering into academia, and especially for first generation students on how to cope within academia? So I think all of you are experienced in this realm, and maybe we could go around and just have everyone give like one piece of advice.
I can just quickly say I would simply reiterate Danae's point from earlier. I would not still be in my program if I had not found community, built community, and found people who, it's beyond just commiserating. You're finding people who understand the exact issues you're having from your perspective and from from disciplinarily and interpersonally. I think it's absolutely crucial that you have, or at least seek out that network.
Thank you, Delande. Myeashea?
Sure. Yeah, find your community. And I know this is, for some people, this is easier said than done. I'll say that I used to be a very shy individual, socially awkward. Getting to know people, reaching out to people was something that is very, very difficult to me. And had I known that it was going to impact my career academically and professionally so much, I would have worked on maybe developing those skills sooner. But if you are one of those people that are not necessarily comfortable in a crowd or maybe reaching out and introducing yourself, it's a skill. You can learn it. It's a muscle. You can work it out, and it will not be easy. It'll take practice, but I really encourage you all to do that and to not be afraid to ask. Like, reach out to anybody. If you admire their work or you would love to know more about them, email them. I'm often surprised how often my emails are returned with like, yeah, I'd love to talk to you. So make that a nice habit as well, and learn how to email nicely and properly, please.
Thank you so much. LaShanda?
For me, honestly, self-care. I think that you have to go into grad school with keeping yourself and your health as the #1 priority, because it's so easy to lose yourself and all of your curiosity and passion about your research, and next thing you know, you just lost all sense of who you are and what you care about, for real. So whatever self-care looks like for you is, figure that out, try different things, implement them into your daily routine, make time for yourself. You come first.
I love that. Thank you. Allison?
And to remember that someone, at least one person, wanted you there and accepted you, and that you do belong. You're not taking anyone's spot. I'm sure we've all heard that. They're lies. You are good enough for the imposter syndrome. And then to with what LaShonda said, take self-care, but also, I treated graduate school like it was my job, but then you still need to have boundaries. So, network, know what the goal is going to be, but don't, bring it home all the time, and try to separate, your world and your lives, because the goal is to graduate. And then the goal is to then, become whatever it is as a professional. But you do need the degree first.
Thank you so much. Danae?
Man, yeah, I would double down on all of those, like self-advocating, going out there and going for it. Networking and finding other people that you can share and just be human with, right? Like connect to. And self-care, there's and finding a way to finding a practice, like some way that you can support yourself. A lot of us as academics tend to identify all of ourselves with our work, and that's really dangerous. So coming to understand and know yourself separately and take care of yourself separately from the work is really important. And then maybe another bright note is trying to find what that inspiration and passion is for you, and kind of keeping that vision that you have for why you got into this and why you do it alive. It's really easy to get pulled in different ways, but kind of finding a vision that works for you and keeping that alive and being true to it, kind of like being true to yourself. So
Thank you so much. So I'll end it by saying also for that community to make sure to connect with the Black in BioAnth group on Instagram and Twitter, and stay with us throughout the end of this week. And tomorrow is also our social networking event at 8 p.m. EST. We will have all the details on Instagram and Twitter. And it will be a more casual atmosphere to have a conversation with each other and meet other bioanthropologists and archaeologists, because it's a co-event. But I also want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules and joining us today for this panel. It was really, really amazing to hear all of your stories. I know I was very inspired. And we've gotten a lot of comments in addition to the questions, and it was very positive. So thank you so much. I'll give you a round of applause. Thank you all. And yeah, I think that will be the end of our event. Thank you to the audience, everyone who came out to listen and took the time to be with us here today. Thank you. Bye.